The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like to now hand over to Judge Lavigne to continue putting the questions to the witness.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Witness, following the evacuation of the foreigners from Cambodia, information started pouring out. And do you know what the reactions were of the Cambodian authorities in relation to this information that started circulating regarding the evacuation of Phnom Penh? For example, information regarding executions. Did you inform yourself to try to see how the situation was developing?
Response. I started to find out what had happened since September 1975. I listened to Mr. Ieng Sari in France. He talked about good things in Cambodia. And he also convinced some or invited some students to return to Cambodia. He continued to say that he asked people not to believe people who talked bad about Angkar. It was a lie. And in 1977, in my book Cambodia Year Zero, Ieng Sari also talked about or challenged the content in the book. He said everything written in the book was completely wrong.
I would like to return to the moments that immediately followed the evacuation of the foreigners from Cambodia. And on the case file, we have a certain number of documents, and one of them is entitled Press Communique or Press Release from the Propaganda and Information Minister of the Royal Government of National Union of Kampuchea on the departure of the foreigners from Kampuchea. This is a statement that dates back to 10 May 1975, in which the government of Kampuchea explains that it had no other choice than forcing the foreigners to leave. And it's also stated that that the evacuation took place despite much effort to solve in an urgent way the problems of subsistence of our people that went through more than 5 years of suffering due to the barbarous imperialist wars. Though we did not have any transportation means, and though our roads and our rivers were practically unusable, all of this demonstrated and proved our high ethical sense and our sense of justice and fairness. And the foreigners were brought to the border and they cannot claim the opposite. And in this difficult situation, we were lacking everything. And the care that we took to take all of these foreigners to the border show how we have high principles. But the American imperialists and their lackeys used their propaganda machines to inflate this story, therefore continuing with their hostility towards Cambodia and its people. This is due to their cruel and aggressive nature, and this is due to their low-lying feeling of vengeance towards Cambodia. So, were you aware of the existence of this communique?
Response: no, I don't. However, I support the first part of the statement that Angkar paid attention to foreigners in Cambodian context during the difficult time. I would not wish to talk much about foreigners because we were in Cambodia. Whatever happened to us, we had to be responsible for ourselves. And I would like to also talk more about Cambodian people rather than the foreigners.
We will get back to this, but first let me give you the following information. This is document D359/1/1.1.56, as well as D199/26.2.116. And you said that you tried to inform yourself. So, among the sources of information that you used, for example, radio, it seems, what can you tell us to these sources of information? How were these sources of information relevant?
Response: first, I took refugees as the great sources of information. The information I gathered from September 1975 was based on these sources. Nonetheless, when it comes to refugees, we have to be careful because we would like to seek the truth, and refugees would exaggerate information because they had suffered. That's why they talked something which perhaps may not be true. However, the accounts I have gathered from refugees on several occasions, these accounts were well shared by other refugees from other provinces, including Battambang, Svay Rieng. They talked the same accounts, and having collected these accounts, I can compare whether the message is truth. And at the same time, I also have some idea. I have a kind of preconcept. I supported Angkar, and I believe that leaders of Angkar got educated in France. They were intellectuals. They were well educated, so they would know much about what happened in Cambodia. And to learn more about them, I started to listen to radio broadcasts, the radio broadcast by the Democratic Cambodia, and I got friends of mine who recorded the radio broadcast and had them sent to me to listen. I would like to know the ideology of the Khmer Rouge. And as I told you, I had the idea or I understood that Khmer Rouge would not comprise of bad people. I was convinced that these people had a better plan for the good of their country. They would never do damage to their own people, for sure. The Democratic Cambodia's radio broadcasts talked about this, and the refugees also gave me the accounts and how they were influenced by the ideology. But these people did not know very much about what had happened around them. And I listened to the radio broadcast, and at the same time I tried to explain to the refugees on what happened in the country. So there were two sources of information I have gathered. These sources of information were collected scientifically, and at the same time they would be combined so that I could get the full accounts.
Well, regarding these reports on the refugee accounts, you wrote to the investigating judge on 4 December 2009, and this is D133/1/1, and you state the following: because you gave Judge Lamont, in fact, a certain number of accounts, of written accounts, and they are two categories. First of all, there are summaries and translations in French of 94 refugee accounts, and that amounts to about 300 pages, 300 typed pages. And then there's also translations and summaries of about 100 refugee accounts, and you interviewed in Paris or in Thailand, and you say the following: out of the 94 accounts, some of these accounts were gathered in France or in Thailand by myself orally between 1975 and 1976, and for others, Père Venet, Father Venet, therefore, who was also present in the refugee camps, asked certain refugees to describe their lives in democratic Cambodia. I translated these accounts, and then I went to the refugee camps to check these accounts in July 1976, and most of these accounts were gathered in Khmer, except for some of them in French. The only aim of these accounts was to understand as best as possible the situation in democratic Cambodia, in order for the French people to know about it through various publications, such as the documentation center of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is something that was conducted seriously, but it was not a scientific job. And I used these documents to write the book Cambodia Year Zero, and in fact you refer to these summaries in your book, and you also say the following regarding the other refugee interviews: the same method was used for the same purpose for the refugee accounts after I published Cambodia Year Zero. And you also explained that in both cases the recordings were destroyed. Therefore, I cannot unfortunately provide you with the original Khmer versions, because they are in the archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, therefore, there were also audio recordings, I see, with these audio recordings of the accounts of these Khmer refugees. Is that the case?
Response. Normally, when we interview a witness, we allow the person to speak and we would record his or her testimony, because by writing we would not cover the full message. And that with that record, if we would like to have it verified, then we would go back to the recording. And I interviewed several hundreds of refugees. And after several years, I have already discarded them.
So you said that you completed your sources of information thanks to radio recordings that were given to you, and you also referred not only to the audio recordings of these radio broadcasts, but also to the translations of excerpts from these radio broadcasts by the Summary World Broadcasting that was broadcast by the BBC. Did you also use these sources or not at all?
Response. No, I didn't cite the sources from the BBC because I couldn't speak English, and it would be difficult for me to use the sources. And translation is not easy because we cannot really translate the right messages most of the time. And I went to the bookstores, and I also went to another place in France where communist books would be published and displayed. So I collected the information concerning the information on Cambodia, because at that time these resources were not plentiful, because Angkar did not write much. At the beginning I heard the term Kama Pibal or cadre, and I tried to understand this Khmer term by understanding the combination of words. I thought that Kama Pibal or cadre would be the person who govern or who administer some works, because it could have come from French term cadre. And I used to also feel that Angkar used strange, unusual terms, and we have here a steel header. For example, Steve Header is the best researcher on the democratic Cambodia and Angkar. However, by 1979, up until 1979, he supported the Khmer Rouge, and he was a member of the Amnesty International, and he never talked bad about the Khmer Rouge because he enjoyed living in Cambodia. And he also wrote an article to Noam Chomsky, who was about the misunderstanding and translation in Cambodian world, and he criticized Cambodia concerning the translation of the terms. And he also talked about this, and I captured this in my book, Cambodia Year Zero. And the reason he criticized the translation of the terms because he was not the one who lived through Democratic Cambodia. Now I can give you two examples. The head monk in my book. When we say Kanak Song, which means the monk head or committee, but still had said that I did not know Khmer very much, because when it comes to Kanak, it means group, and group here referring to Mahayana. Rather, it's when it comes to Kanak Song, it's the committee for the monk rather than the head monk. And more importantly, the Khmer Rouge used some other terms that Mr. Steve Hader did not want us to use. For example, Puk Mai. And Puk Mai mean parents that were used in these Khmer Rouge time at the rice fields.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting you, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. We have other questions to put to you, and I'm sure what you're talking about could interest linguists, but we might have other priorities right now. So among the documents that you referred to try to understand what was happening in Cambodia, did you refer to documents, to official documents that were published in particular by the Grunk mission in Paris?
Response. Grunk had a house in Paris. Ngat Chupironto was the man who was in charge of the mansion. And I also looked at the documents, and we studied the purpose of Angkar, and we could decide whether it was right or wrong that Angkar did like that. And also we listened to what the refugees had to say about this.
Well, in order to note the references, I would like to give as an example a document that you referred to in your book, which is the information bulletin of the Grunk mission in Paris. It is number 220 bis out of 75, dated 12 September 1975, and the document is D199/26.2.137. And this is a bulletin that's quite interesting, because it was produced a short while after the fall of Phnom Penh, and we see in it an interview with Mr. Kirsompan, who was the Deputy Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief of the FAPLNK, or by the representative of the Kampuchea News Agency on 12 August 1975. The French ERN is 0038 68 86 to 89. English 0087 83 58 to 61. And Khmer 0087 7499 to 0087 7504. So I don't think we have the time to describe the content of this interview, although it's interesting. But basically, Monsieur Cussampan says the following. He's describing a situation he discovers in 1975, and he says, our compatriots, by the millions, were locked up in concentration camps in Phnom Penh and in the other cities under enemy temporary control. The victims had no food. Cholera was decimating them. Families were torn apart and scattered throughout the entire country. Immediately after the liberation, the Grunk and the Funk, the people and the People's Army decided to tackle these problems with determination, which were the results of the most barbarous war of destruction from the U.S. imperialists. So question, how to solve these problems? On the one hand, the people in the countryside made all sacrifices in order to win the war of attrition brought upon by the American imperialists and their lackeys, and suffered for years on end. On the other hand, millions of city dwellers who had only been liberated suffered from hunger owing to the enemy and were in an appalling state. The problem is of unprecedented gravity, and we must resolve it without further ado, as this is vital for both our nation and our people. We have managed to mobilize all of the forces, including our people and our army, in order to fight and deal with the new extremely serious situation, while at the same time manifesting deep patriotism on the spirit of independence and sovereignty, maintaining control over the situation and our decisions, having confidence in our own forces, and maintaining firm control over our destiny and that of our country. After more than 3 months of dogged struggle, we were able to resolve the core of the problem. We were able to provide the entire country with basic necessities. We may not be living in abundance, but we have managed to resolve this vital issue. Our people now have the means to lead a normal life and to work towards getting the country back on its feet. And a bit further, he finishes with the following. Now we have solved all of the difficulties, and our country is enjoying a profound change. The change is one of continued improvement. I can assure you that we shall never again experience economic crisis, unemployment, inflation, or price hikes. So, knowing that, of course, there was no currency, this might be a little bit surprising. So, do you remember this interview of Mr. Kyosampan?
Je précise qu'elle date du...
To specify that it dates back to August 1975.
Yeah, but
the President, witness, please observe some pause. Please see the red light before you speak. I do not recall clearly, but these were the propagandized words. I read a lot of propagandized words, but I did not pay attention to it that much. On this particular issue, it was completely different from what I heard from the refugee. That's why I do not believe in this statement. For example, I listen to the Voice of Democratic Cambodia on almost everyday basis. They broadcast the last part, the finding of the Khieu Samphan dissertation, which indicated that people had to transform Cambodia into they broadcast the finding of his dissertation, and the refugee did not understand the reason why the Angka made people to work that hard to build dike and dig a reservoir also. But actually Angka had the plan, and that plan was not necessarily written, but it was to transform Cambodia into and the plan was not clear-cut, and the Angka wanted people to build dike and dams in order to be self-reliant and self-sufficient for the country. This is the principal agenda of Angka, and I am actually myself find it satisfactory.
Attendez.
Even now, somewhere around Orang Au, I actually restore the water reservoir and canals where the Angka actually made people to duck up this water reservoir and irrigation system. I actually did not like the way they treated people. They abused people, or they actually made people work too hard. But actually, I think that the plan was very well implemented and structured.
If I understood correctly, you said that excerpts from Khieu Samphan's thesis had been disseminated. I'm not sure that we heard this properly in French, but Khieu Samphan's thesis excerpts of Khieu Samphan's thesis were broadcast on the radio to justify the efforts asked from the population in order to dig canals and build dams. Is that what you're telling us?
Actually, they did not make mention that it was an excerpt from the dissertation, but it was actually the last page of his dissertation in order to motivate people to work. This was actually a very good plan.
Très bon. Comme dat, très bon. Comme dat je panka kusam.
It was a fairly good plan.
Ne satavati
In the 20th century, we could be self-reliant and self-mastery. We based on agricultural production. At that time, we were self-sufficient because our agricultural sector was robust. I apologize, Your Excellency, Khieu Samphan.
Problème d'industrialisation.
I confused the title of your dissertation with that of Mr. Hu Nam.
Si vous faites référence.
If you are referring to a specific page from your book, can you please inform the chamber exactly what reference you are reading from? And if you don't have it now, could you please provide that tomorrow morning?
It is on page 113.
Alors, c'est une précision aussi.
And just for your information, we are dealing with several versions. Are you referring to page 113 of the original version? That was published in March 1976.
Shnama Puan Pamunroy Tetsepampel.
On the 3rd of February 1977.
Alors, revenons au bulletin.
Let us return to the bulletin that was issued by the Grunk mission in Paris. For your information, there are a great deal of documents that are on the case file, including an interview with Mr. Yang Sari and conducted by Yang Springer with the Newsweek magazine in 1975. There's also a speech given by Mr. Yang Sari at the General Assembly of the UN in August 1975, and lastly, a Yang Sari speech, Vice Prime Minister of the Grunk, head of the delegation of Democratic Cambodia at an extraordinary meeting of the UN in 1975. These are the references, the sources that you based upon that you based your research upon in drafting several articles, some of which were published in the French magazines France Asie or Échange. There were others that were published elsewhere. An article was also lifted by the French daily in Le Monde. I'm referring to document D103/1/2. You qualify the revolution in Cambodia as one being quite radical, and that it is possible that there could be some 800,000 victims at the start of this revolution. There are also articles that you authored and appeared in other magazines. In February or March 1976. You had written in February, but it was only published in March. Is that correct?
Alors, pour le transcrit, parce que votre micro n'était pas ouvert.
Just for the record, since your microphone was not lit, you have just stated that the article came out on the 3rd of February 1976. You also contributed to the drafting of information bulletin on Cambodia. You're also published in the magazines La Croix, Esprit. You also took part in several television and radio interviews. And what is of interest to us now is your contribution to a piece written by the International Commission of Jurists to the Human Rights Commission. It was published on the 16th of August, 1978. Now, thanks to your work, since you were one of the first to draw attention to this matter, was to bring before an international audience, particularly the Human Rights Commission, what was going on in Cambodia. What can you tell us about that? In what context did this occur? And what were the results? What was the ultimate outcome of your participation?
First, I would like to make it clear that I am not a politician. I write the books or I speak on the broadcasting system because I wanted to share my feeling with the Cambodian people who are suffering from the difficulties and enduring all the suffering. I have lived with the Cambodian people both during happy times and sad times. I am not a politician, not until today. I do not understand this commissioner in Geneva who asked me to come to report with this committee on the human rights status of Cambodia at the United Nations. It was on the 15th of July 1978. Back then, I was like an object from nowhere, from another alien planet. Nobody listened to me. They did not pay attention to what I said at all. I wonder why they did not listen to me. That's why, to be frank, I do not really like the way the United Nations worked. They actually they did not know. Actually, they had known it very clearly. They had their agents along the border. They must have known it very well. They knew that the Khmer Rouge had killed a lot of civilian people, but they chose to be indifferent of the situation. I did not understand why they chose this course of action. No, actually, I do understand. I understand, because there was the ideological warfare between the Soviet and China. There was the Cold War going on. At that time, the American soldiers were defeated in Vietnam, so all the remaining or residual issue was left to China. So China gathered all the support in the United Nations against Soviet at that time, and at that time they made use of the Khmer Rouge in order to go against the Soviet. Especially from 1979 onward, the Soviet, or rather China and the United Nations, made use of the Khmer Rouge in order to be against the Soviet. I am ashamed of the United Nations. They supported the Khmer Rouge for 19 years, even though they knew that the work that the Khmer Rouge had done was barbaric, and they killed innocent people, but they chose to be indifferent. What is the meaning of human rights? We want to, we accept the value of human rights, but if we ignore the human rights abuse in the country, I feel ashamed of the United Nations. I am actually ashamed that the United Nations is coming in and now taking part in prosecuting the Khmer Rouge leader. I am really ashamed of the United Nations. I don't think that they should be involved in bringing the Khmer Rouge to trial now.
Alors, revenons à la...
Let us return to the year of 1978. Specifically, the Commission on Human Rights, which was reviewing the Cambodian situation. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this took place during the 34th session in March 1978. At the time, the representative for Great Britain had requested that Democratic Cambodia be invited to comment on the human rights situation in that country. And in theory, the request had drawn the ire of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Democratic Cambodia. However, a certain number of countries and organizations had submitted reports to the Commission on Human Rights. These reports include documents from Norway, Amnesty International, as well as the United States, as well as Great Britain. Norway and Great Britain had relied on an international symposium on Cambodia organized in Oslo on the 21st and 22nd of April 1978. A certain number of witnesses and experts were heard. You yourself had appeared before those hearings, and those deliberations served as the basis for the reports that were drafted subsequently and ultimately addressed to the Human Rights Commission. I'd like for us to focus on the content of those reports. I'm referring to E3/1804, ERN in French 00 23 31 58 to 00 23 31 670, ERN in English 00 08 75 24 to 75 66, in Khmer 00 23 28 00 to 00 23 00 13. This report contains a certain number of findings. I just wanted to know if you believe that these findings are still relevant to this day. Now, the French ERN 0023 31 61, you say the following. Following review of the refugee accounts, which number in the hundreds, it is quite possible to establish with certainty the following facts. Firstly, executions. Nearly all the officers, senior officials, policemen, intelligence agents, customs officials and military police were executed during the first few days after the victory of 17th April 1975. Detailed and completely independent accounts were obtained concerning the towns of Phnom Penh, Battambang, Siem Reap, Oda Menche, Pailin, Preaviher, and other smaller settlements. People in these categories who succeeded in concealing their identities during the first few months have been systematically sought out, especially since early 1976, and executed. In a very large number of cases, the wives and children of these people are also reported to have been executed. Non-commissioned officers, army privates, minor officials, headmen of 10, 50, or 100 households, and members of paramilitary militia groups were treated differently according to the region concerned. Some were executed during the days immediately following the revolutionary victory. Others were sent to extremely hard labor camps, practically death camps. Yet others were allowed to go back to their native villages, where some of them were executed in 1975, while the remainder have been actively sought out since 1976 and have mostly been executed. Cases of summary execution of doctors, engineers, professors, teachers, students, and school pupils occurred during the first few weeks, but this does not seem to have been the general rule. They were sometimes resettled in special villages and were sometimes absorbed in the population, but were placed under special supervision. The slightest offense on their part against revolutionary morale, be it grumbling, lack of zeal at work, was punished by death. Since 1977, it seems that they have been systematically sought out and executed. Persons showing any disapproval of the regime are generally subjected to verbal correction or edification, sometimes accompanied by punishment, deprivation of food, bastinado, exposure to the sun without food or drink, etc. They are sometimes imprisoned. A second or third offense is tantamount to death. In 1977 and 1978, bloody purges struck at the state machinery itself. In the northern region, at least, in Battambang, Siem Reap, Odamanche, Preah Vihear, Kompong Tom, and even in Khatye Kompong Cham, large numbers of officials were arrested and executed, usually with their families. Peasants working under the orders of certain officials sometimes suffered the same fate. Councillor Verken, pardon me for interrupting, Mr. President, but I believe that we are going above and beyond the confines of this trial. I believe that questions must be relevant, and they are not at all in correspondence with the scope and definition of this trial.
May I add something to the submissions of my learned colleague? I also believe that, as I have said earlier, the witness is a witness to the events that he has witnessed. That's why he's a witness. But I'm not sure if we should ask him questions which have the scope of treating him like an expert, which seems, with all the respect, Your Honor, that you are doing at the moment.
The President, Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Thank you. I believe that there are two separate matters that are being raised by the defense. Firstly, whether this document submitted to the United Nations is relevant. I think the matter is very clear. A certain number of passages from the report have been read out. They concern execution, and these passages deal with executions that happened just after the victory of the 17th of April, which concern the near totality of military officers, etc. There's also a mention of the execution of certain cadres afterwards in 1977 and 1978. But as far as the individuals mentioned by Judge Laverne, there is a description of summary executions during the first weeks after the capture of Phnom Penh. In that respect, if indeed the defense for Mr. Kyo Sompong is raising an objection, it cannot be sustained. Obviously, the witness believes, as to whether the witness can answer in his capacity as an expert. Well, in 1978, had considered that this witness did enjoy certain expertise and was speaking in his capacity as an expert at the time. Thank you.
The President, counsel for Mr. Kilsompon's objection, which was supported by counsel for Nuonji, is not sustained. The questions are put by the bench, and finally it is the bench that will examine or analyze the property value of the testimony, and since it is now this afternoon session coming to an end, we would like Judge Levian to finish putting the few final questions.
Well, I would like to specify that the information contained in this report have a direct link with the scope of this trial, and in particular there are findings in there regarding the evacuations. And you said the following: so the population of Phnom Penh and of all of the cities and towns in the government zones was evacuated in the days that followed 17 April 1975. Hospitals were empties. The injured and the ill had to leave their beds, and those who were not able to move were executed. And this involved more than 4 million people and caused the death of many elderly people, young children, and pregnant women. So can you tell us, witness, based on what information were you able to write this account?
Response: I interviewed several hundred refugees. With that, there is no shred of doubt at all. And in order to tell the truth, during the Khmer Rouge regime, one place was different from another. I gathered information from Battambang, and I did not obtain sources of information from other locations. Mr. Michael Vickery, who wrote a book, Cambodia 1975-1982, he criticized me on several points, and I indeed accept his critics, and I thought that people would receive the same treatments all across the country, but I learned that indeed people were treated differently from one place to another. The plan was common in all places, but the restriction, the discipline was harsh on one location than the other. And in this report, when I wrote in about 1977, I did not know about the war that was waged between Khmer and Vietnamese. I was doubtful that, or I was suspicious that it could be a war, but there was no information that could support this suspicion. And the Khmer Rouge attacked the Vietnamese at the border area, and the hostility happened, and it resulted in some casualty. And also there was what we call what Tamok called the second revolution. And Tamok was in charge of the southwest, and along with Pol Pot in the West, they started to reshuffle cadres all across Cambodia. By 1977 and 1978, people in the rank of the Khmer Rouge, a lot of them died. For example, in Oslo, I gave a list of 100 names in the report, and these people were Khmer Rouge cadres who were executed in the eastern zone in Kampong Cham province. In 1977, what happened until 1977 was part of the ideology. They would like to create new people. They would like them to build dikes and canals and change the way of life. And that happened all from 1977, and at that time the war in Vietnam also logically happened. I told reporters in France, but they were not convinced. And in April 1977, I met refugees in France, and I tuned into radio broadcast, and I heard Khieu Samphan were talking about the war with Vietnam. He talked about Vietnamese invading or coming into Cambodia territory in Mae Mot area. The President, thank you, Mr. Witness, and thank you, Judge Lamian. The hearing for today comes to an end. The Chamber will adjourn today's session, and tomorrow hearing will resume by 9 a.m. For tomorrow's sessions, the Chamber continues hearing the testimony of Mr. Francois Bonchot, questions to be put by co-prosecutors and lead co-lawyers for the civil parties in the morning, and in the afternoon session, counsels for Mr. Khieu Samphan would proceed with the questions and followed by counsels for Mr. Nguyen Chia. Mr. Bonchot, your testimony has not yet concluded, so we would like you to return to the courtroom tomorrow, the session which commences at 9 a.m. Court officer is now directed to assist with the vessel unit to ensure that Mr. Bonchot is well assisted during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom by 9 a.m. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Khieu Samphan and Nguyen Chia back to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom by 9 a.m. For Mr. Nguyen Chia, he is directed to be returned to the holding cell, where he can observe the proceedings from there through audio-visual means. The court is adjourned.